Welcome to this deep dive.
hmm
Um, if you're joining us today, you already know we're living through a moment of, well, absolute unprecedented acceleration.
Yeah, the world is moving incredibly fast right now.
It really is. The noise is deafening, and just trying to parse the signal from the static is practically a full-time job.
Which is exactly why we're here.
Right. For you, the listener, our mission is to cut through all that overwhelming noise.
Hmm.
And today's stack of intelligence is, frankly, it's one of the most massive and varied troves we've ever compiled.
It truly is a staggering amount of data to synthesize today. We are looking at a highly classified style intelligence document, the Manal Mehta Intelligence Memo, and we're cross-referencing that with global news dispatches from major financial outlets, academic preprints straight out of university labs, federal policy drafts,
And the raw social media chatter.
exactly, unfiltered chatter from industry insiders who are actually building the systems we're going to talk about today. The sheer breadth of it is a bit daunting.
It is. But the goal of bringing all these disparate pieces to you is to connect the dots. We're going to draw a direct, undeniable line between a geopolitical earthquake in the Middle East, a massive capital rotation into defense tech, the hidden fragility of the current AI boom, and some absolutely cutting-edge frontier biotech.
It's all connected.
We're going to synthesize all of this so you can see the entire board, not just the isolated pieces.
Yeah.
But before we unpack all of that, we really need to address something critical about the material we are reviewing today.
Yeah, we have to set the ground rules here. Today's stack contains highly politically charged content.
It does.
We're examining specific actions taken by the Trump administration on the global stage, as well as sweeping proposed legislation coming directly from Senate Democrats.
And I want to be explicitly clear with you, our listener, about this. We are not taking sides.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing, nor are we condemning any political viewpoints or actions mentioned today. Our sole purpose here is to impartially report the factual content contained in this original source material.
We are here strictly to analyze the structural, strategic, and economic implications for you. We're looking at the mechanics, the money, and the macro trends. That's it.
Exactly, just the facts and the macro impact.
Precisely. We are examining the board exactly as it is laid out in the intelligence we've gathered. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the hook for today's deep dive is, well, it's truly startling.
It really blew my mind when we were prepping.
Right. By the time we're done today, you're going to understand the intricate mechanics of how a drone strike in the Middle East is simultaneously crushing Asian artificial intelligence stocks, forcing American data centers to rethink the fundamental laws of physics underlying their hardware, and entirely reshaping the global energy map.
Okay, let's just jump right in and unpack this. We have to start where the ground is literally shaking, because the geopolitical reality is sending shockwaves through every other topic in our stack today.
It's the foundation of everything else happening.
The intelligence details a major, unprecedented escalation in the U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran, specifically following the assassination of Supreme Leader Khamenei.
Yeah, that event is the catalyst. It's the spark in the powder keg. But what is really crucial here is the Iranian response.
Right, because it wasn't what people expected.
No. The intelligence we have, particularly triangulating the Manal Mehta Memo with reports from the Financial Times, outlines a very specific retaliatory strategy from Tehran. This isn't just a random lashing out.
It's calculated.
Highly calculated. It's an asymmetric, pre-planned attack targeting regional energy infrastructure and U.S. allies. And the primary overarching objective of this strategy is the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
And for those who might not look at a map of the Persian Gulf every day, the Strait of Hormuz is the ultimate global choke point.
It really is.
It's this narrow strip of water between Oman and Iran. To give you a sense of scale, our intelligence shows that in a normal environment, about 80 oil and gas tankers cross that strait every single day.
80 a day.
It carries roughly a fifth of the world's total oil consumption. But recently, the tracking data shows only 2 tankers made that crossing.
Just two?
Two. The artery has effectively been severed.
And the downstream effects are immediate and severe. Qatar, which is a massive player in global energy, has completely halted its liquefied natural gas, or LNG, production after suffering attacks on its facilities.
Which is a huge deal for global energy markets.
Absolutely. But there's a piece of intelligence regarding military infrastructure that's even more concerning. a $1.1 billion U.S. radar system located in Qatar.
Alien with a B.
Right, 1.1 billion. A system that was supposed to serve as the absolute backbone of the U.S. missile defense umbrella in the Gulf was completely destroyed by a single Iranian missile.
That is just wild.
The U.S. and its allies are essentially operating blind in the region right now. Add to that the fact that over 11,000 commercial flights have been canceled globally as airspace is shut down. The physical disruption is immense.
But, and this is what's so strange, when you look at how the stock market reacted initially, you wouldn't think the world's energy artery just got severed. There was this weird stabilization.
Yeah, a total disconnect.
Why is the mainstream financial market looking at this massive physical disruption and seemingly just shrugging its shoulders?
Well, what's fascinating here is the incredibly naive. The intelligence suggests that Khamenei's death didn't just provoke national anger. It created a profound power vacuum at the very top of the regime in Tehran.
And vacuums are dangerous.
Exactly. When you have a power vacuum in a heavily militarized state, command structures decentralize. You no longer have a single voice pulling the strings.
You have rogue elements.
You have various factions, regional commanders, proxy groups acting on preset instructions, but executing them independently and without central coordination.
Wow.
This structural shift makes the retaliations significantly more erratic, much harder to predict, and ultimately much more prolonged than what Wall Street traders in New York are currently pricing into their models.
So if Wall Street have this wrong, what does this actually mean for the global economy? Because it feels like a lot of corporate planners and policymakers are just holding their breath, waiting for the storm to pass.
If we connect this to the broader macroeconomic picture, it means we're looking at a structural repricing of global risk. This isn't a temporary blip that you can just wait out.
Right.
A sustained, prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a textbook supply-side shock. And supply-side shocks lead directly to stagflation.
Which is the absolute worst-case scenario.
It is a uniquely toxic economic cocktail. You get high inflation because the fundamental cost of energy, which is baked into the price of literally everything that moves, skyrockets.
Yeah, from shipping Amazon packages to buying groceries.
Exactly. But simultaneously, you get stagnant economic growth or even a recession because global supply chains are paralyzed and factories can't operate.
Central banks must be panicking.
They're suddenly forced into an impossible corner. I mean, do they keep interest rates high to fight the war-induced inflation, knowing they might crush the economy? Or do they cut rates to save a weakening economy, risking hyperinflation?
And the political backdrop detailed in our stack just injects more gasoline into that fire.
It really does.
We have a Financial Times dispatch characterizing the current situation as a war of whim initiated by the Trump administration.
That phrase stood out to me too, war of whim.
The analysis argues that the policy lacks a coherent exit strategy and shifts wildly day by day between maximalist goals like total regime change and more focused goals like nuclear disarmament.
It's all over the place.
And we are seeing this erratic policy execution playing out in real time. For instance, the administration is reportedly threatening to cut off all trade with Spain, a major NATO and European ally, simply because Madrid refused to allow U.S. forces to use Spanish military bases to launch strikes against Iran.
It injects maximum uncertainty into a system that is already incredibly fragile. The dispatches also note the administration publicly insulting the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, stating he is no Churchill.
Just because the UK hesitated initially.
Right, simply because the UK initially hesitated to grant blanket permission for U.S. planes to use British air bases. When allies cannot align because the objectives are unpredictable, the alliance architecture fragments.
Which is terrifying for global stability.
And for global markets, that political unpredictability makes pricing risk virtually impossible. You can't build a corporate financial model when the geopolitical rules of the game change every morning on social media.
Yeah, you just can't. But, while the macroeconomic picture is grim, there is a human and localized economic element to this geopolitical chess game that I found incredibly compelling in the research. And it's a hidden vein that rarely makes the front page of Western newspapers.
The India connection.
Yes, we are talking about India. The data shows there are 9.3 million Indians living and working in the Persian Gulf. To put that in perspective for you, that's roughly the entire population of Austria, just living as expatriate workers across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar.
And their economic impact on their home country is staggering. These individuals aren't just a diaspora, they're an economic engine.
A massive one.
Ranging from high-level corporate executives in Dubai to construction laborers in Doha, these workers send approximately $125 billion in remittances back to India every single year.
That number is hard to wrap your head around. $125 billion. The analysis points out that this is almost twice as much as India exported to the U.S. annually before the recent rounds of tariffs.
Yeah.
It's an absolute lifeline for the Indian economy.
It's what economists call a secret thrumming vein of Indian domestic stability. That $125 billion flows directly into local real estate markets, consumer spending, and banking liquidity, particularly in southern states like Kerala.
Right.
Crucially, it props up the Indian rupee on foreign exchange markets. But right now, with the entire Gulf region turning into an active conflict zone and major commercial hubs like Dubai facing the very real threat of drone strikes and paralyzed airports.
That entire demographic and economic engine is under immediate threat.
Exactly. Consider the dual shock India is facing right now. India is a massive energy consumer, importing roughly 90% of its crude oil, with the vast majority coming straight through that now closed Strait of Hormuz.
So their energy costs are exploding.
If oil prices spike, the Indian government bleeds U.S. dollars to pay for that imported energy. At the exact same time, if those 9.3 million workers are forced to evacuate, or if the Gulf economy simply crashes and they lose their jobs, that $125 billion remittance lifeline is completely severed.
The perfect storm.
It is a catastrophic dual shock that could severely destabilize the Indian economy, crash the rupee, and create a massive domestic political crisis for the Modi government.
It's incredible how interconnected it all is. A missile hits a radar in Qatar, and suddenly the real estate market in a local Indian state is at risk of collapse.
That's the globalized economy for you.
But let me play devil's advocate for a moment here. If the Middle East is offline, and global oil prices are spiking well over $75 a barrel, historical muscle memory tells us that the U.S. should just step in.
Right, the old playbook.
We always hear about the U.S. being this massive energy powerhouse. Why aren't the frackers in Texas and North Dakota spinning up 1,000 new rigs today to flood the market, capture that premium, and save the day?
You're raising the exact assumption that global markets and policymakers have relied on for the past decade. The idea that the U.S. shale industry is the world's reliable swing producer.
Because they always have been.
Exactly. The traditional playbook says that the second oil hits $75 or $80, U.S. operators unleash a wave of capital, drill aggressively, flood the global market with fresh supply, and bring prices right back down.
So why aren't they doing it?
But the intelligence, particularly reports from the Wall Street Journal, indicates that assumption is now dead wrong. U.S. frackers are explicitly refusing to rush in. They're not adding rigs. They're keeping production relatively flat.
But why? Surely if oil hits $100 or $120 a barrel, basic capitalist greed overrides any corporate discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is physically or financially stopping an operator from just drilling like crazy to capture that massive price premium?
What's stopping them is a deep institutional permanent scarring. Yeah, to understand this, you have to look back at the previous decade. For years, the U.S. shale industry pursued a relentless growth-at-all-costs model. They borrowed heavily and pumped massive amounts of oil.
Oh, right, the boom years.
But in doing so, they destroyed vast amounts of shareholder value. They constantly oversupplied the market, crashing the price of their own product. When Saudi Arabia initiated price wars, U.S. companies went bankrupt by the dozens.
It was a bloodbath for investors.
The executives who survived that era have PTSD. Today, the major players companies like Diamondback Energy and ConocoPhillips are operating under a strict, unyielding mandate of capital discipline from their shareholders.
Shareholders want returns, not growth.
Exactly. Wall Street isn't rewarding them for production growth anymore. Wall Street is demanding cash flow, so they're taking the massive profits generated by $75+ oil, and instead of sinking it into new speculative wells, they're using it to aggressively pay down debt, issue special dividends, and buy back their own stock.
So, to put it in relatable terms, the old shale industry was like a reckless gambler, constantly borrowing money from the house to keep playing every hand, hoping for a massive payout, but usually going bust. And the new shale industry is a disciplined accountant.
That is a perfect analogy.
They found a winning, high-margin strategy, and they are perfectly content to just sit back, limit their exposure, and collect the interest.
Spot on. And the massive implication, the real so what, for you, the listener, and the global economy is that the fundamental nature of U.S. shale has structurally transformed.
So a whole new ball game.
It used to act as a price cap. If prices got too high, shale would flood the market and cap them. Now it's become a price floor.
A price floor. Because they won't drill to save us.
By refusing to overproduce, they're ensuring global supply stays structurally tight. And this, crucially, hands immense long-term pricing power right back to OPEC and its allies. The era of the U.S. simply drilling its way out of a geopolitical supply shock is over. The capital discipline is too ingrained.
Which brings us to a really stark divergence in how different global powers are reacting to this new energy reality and the collapse of global stability.
The contrast is jarring.
On one hand, according to the sources, you have the U.S. administration dealing with an energy deficit by publicly touting a return to beautiful, clean coal to help power the massive electricity demands of the AI boom here at home.
It's a very politically expedient domestic patch.
Exactly. But over in Europe, the reaction to the same collapsing global stability is radically different and, frankly, much more profound.
While the U.S. supplies a domestic band-aid to its grid, Europe is facing what it perceives as an existential threat to its survival. We have a detailed intelligence source outlining an unprecedented proposal from French President Emmanuel Macron.
This part of the memo was wild.
He is actively offering to extend France's sovereign nuclear deterrent, specifically deploying nuclear-armed Rafale fighter jets across allied European nations like Germany, Poland, and Sweden.
Let's just pause on that because that is historically massive. France's nuclear doctrine, the force de frappe, has always been fiercely independent. They usually keep their nuclear umbrellas strictly over French soil. Offering to share it with Germany is, well, it's wild.
It's a monumental generational shift in European defense architecture. Macron is proposing a formalized Franco-German nuclear steering group. This signals a fundamental, perhaps irreversible move toward true European strategic autonomy.
They're realizing they're on their own.
We're witnessing the birth of a two-pillar security model for the West. For the last 70 years, Europe essentially outsourced its ultimate security to the United States nuclear guarantee.
And now they can't trust it.
Now, driven by a collapsing trust in that guarantee, especially given the current U.S. administration's erratic rhetoric toward NATO allies, Europe is coming to the harsh realization that it must arm and protect itself.
And importantly, this isn't just about military hardware. It's deeply tied to energy independence.
Yes.
France's heavy reliance on and embrace of nuclear power suddenly elevates uranium from a basic commodity to a critical strategic defense asset for the entire continent.
And the Manal Mehta intelligence memo actually points out very specific ways institutional money is trading on this shift.
Always follow the money.
Always. They suggest going long on those disciplined U.S. oil producers we mentioned, like ConocoPhillips, because they'll just keep raking in cash. But they also strongly suggest buying uranium and nuclear infrastructure assets, like Cameco. The thesis is that this European rearmament and the shift toward sovereign, secure energy like nuclear is not a cyclical fad. It's a multi-decade secular trend.
Exactly. And that bridges perfectly into where the smart institutional capital is actually flowing right now across the global markets.
Yeah.
Money is rapidly abandoning sectors that were formerly the absolute darlings of the last decade, and it's flooding directly into the machinery of geopolitics and hard power.
It's a massive reallocation.
We are talking about a secular capital rotation. This isn't just a brief dip in the market. This is a fundamental repositioning of trillions of dollars away from consumer discretionary goods and green technology, straight into defense technology and hard assets.
Trillions with a T.
And the absolute prime example of this in our intelligence stack is the massive German auto supplier, Schaeffler.
Schaeffler is a perfect case study of this macroeconomic pain. This is a massive, highly respected legacy industrial company that essentially makes the parts that make the global economy move.
A bellwether.
According to the Wall Street Journal reporting in our stack, their shares recently plunged a staggering 18% in a single day.
18%.
The catalyst, they issued absolutely disastrous forward guidance for their e-mobility division, the exact division that was supposed to be leading their glorious, profitable transition into the electric vehicle future.
Right, the EV revolution.
They're now projecting profit margins of -13% to -15% in that specific sector.
Negative 15%. That is an absolute bloodbath. Why are the margins so catastrophically bad? Is it just Chinese competition flooding the market with cheaper EVs?
It's a combination of factors. Yes, fierce state-subsidized Chinese competition is a massive headwind. But it's also the reality that the EV transition requires astronomical upfront capital expenditures to retool factories, coupled with a consumer base that is suddenly balking at high prices and range anxiety in a high-inflation environment. It's a terrible business to be in right now.
So what does a massive company do when their future growth engine completely stalls out?
In response to this catastrophic EV failure, Schaeffler announced a desperate structural pivot. They are officially shifting their capital and engineering focus away from consumer cars and toward humanoid robotics and defense applications.
They're running from the consumer and running toward the military.
Precisely. And the intelligence memo points out that this isn't just a cyclical downturn in car sales where you wait a few years for demand to recover. It's a secular capital rotation.
Rational institutional capital allocation is fleeing the EV market.
Because it's hyper-competitive, requires massive ongoing capex, and offers terrible, often negative margins. Instead, that capital is running toward the defense sector.
Why?
Because defense offers something the consumer market currently cannot. Guaranteed, state-backed, inelastic growth. When the world is actively fracturing and nations are at war, governments write blank checks.
And it's not just legacy German industrials making this pivot. We're seeing those blank checks being written by the titans of Silicon Valley, too.
The venture capital boom in defense technology is staggering.
The sources highlight Anduril Industries, a defense tech startup founded by Palmer Luckey. They're currently raising funds at a mind-boggling $60 billion valuation.
$60 billion.
And who is leading that round? Not traditional defense investors, but Silicon Valley heavyweights like Thrive Capital and Andreessen Horowitz.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a company like Anduril represents a structural, existential disruption of the traditional military-industrial complex.
How so?
Think about how legacy defense primes massive companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon Operate. They work on decades-long hardware-centric development cycles. It takes them 10 years just to write the requirements for a new jet, let alone build it.
It's a slow, bureaucratic process.
But AI-native disruptors like Anduril are operating at what they call the speed of software. They're building autonomous drone swarms, computer vision targeting systems, and predictive logistics platforms that iterate and improve as fast as a consumer tech startup pushes an app update.
Though, to be fair to the legacy guys, the sources do explicitly note that the old-school defense primes are still making an absolute fortune right now.
Oh, without a doubt.
But that's not because of innovation. It's simply because of the sheer volume of traditional dumb munitions being expended in the Middle East and elsewhere. The U.S. military is literally burning through years of stockpiled interceptor missiles in a matter of days, trying to shoot down cheap drones.
That's true. The legacy players benefit immensely from the immediate kinetic expenditure of physical hardware. They get paid to restock the shelves.
Right.
But the massive valuation premium, the belief in where the future of warfare is heading, is flowing almost entirely to the software-defined, AI-centric defense companies. And beneath the valuations, we're seeing a profound cultural shift in the tech industry.
Silicon Valley has really changed its tune on this.
Look at OpenAI. The sources note that their CEO, Sam Altman, is now publicly and aggressively defending a deal to provide OpenAI's foundational models and tools to the Pentagon.
I remember just a few years ago when Google employees staged massive protests over Project Maven, demanding the company drop its defense contracts.
Right. Silicon Valley historically shunned the military-industrial complex. Now they're actively and enthusiastically integrating with the national security apparatus. They see it as a patriotic duty and, crucially, an incredibly lucrative market.
But here's where the narrative takes a sharp turn in the data. All of this AI, the autonomous drone swarms navigating battlefields, the massive large language models writing code, the predictive logistics, it requires an unfathomable, almost incomprehensible amount of raw computing power.
Yes, compute is everything.
And that massive demand for compute leads us to a glaring, almost fatal vulnerability that the Middle East conflict just ripped wide open for everyone to see.
This is exactly where the macro narratives of our stack violently collide. The financial market has been entirely captivated by the narrative of AI optimism. We imagine AI as this ethereal thing living in the cloud.
But the cloud is just someone else's computer.
Exactly. AI does not exist in the ether. It exists inside physical, massive data centers, which are powered by physical electricity grids running on physical silicon microchips. And the overwhelming majority of those high-end chips are manufactured in East Asia.
Right, and our sources show that when the Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed by Iran, Asian stock markets completely cratered.
There's a bloodbath.
It wasn't just energy companies that fell. The South Korean Kospi index plunged 12% in a single day. And the AI giants, the companies actually building the physical architecture of the future, like TSMC in Taiwan, Samsung, and SK Hynix, saw their stocks absolutely crash.
Because East Asia's economic engine, and specifically its semiconductor manufacturing capability, is entirely structurally dependent on Middle Eastern energy.
It's a fragile chain.
Japan imports roughly 90% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea depends on the region for over 70% of its crude. You have to understand the scale here. You cannot run a cutting-edge semiconductor fabrication plant, a facility that literally consumes more power and water than a small city, without incredibly reliable, cheap, uninterrupted baseload energy.
When the energy stops, the fabs stop.
The geopolitical risk premium of the physical world finally caught up with the software hype cycle of Silicon Valley.
Let's trace that for a second, just to really visualize it. An AI agent in San Francisco generates a response for you. That computation happens on a physical server, likely using a chip forged in Taiwan, inside a factory that is powered by natural gas shipped from Qatar, which has to travel through the Strait of Hormuz.
It's terrifyingly fragile.
It really is. But the sources also introduce a potential incredibly sci-fi-sounding solution to this specific hardware and energy bottleneck, a startup called SnowCap Compute.
SnowCap is aiming to commercialize something that has long been the holy grail of physics: superconductor chips.
Superconductors. Okay, explain this for us.
Current data centers run on standard CMOS semiconductor technology. The fundamental problem with CMOS is resistance. When you push electricity through silicon, it encounters resistance, which generates immense heat.
And heat is the enemy of data centers.
Right. That heat requires massive cooling systems, which require even more power. CMOS is facing fundamental physical limits regarding how much power it can draw and how efficiently it can compute.
Which explains the energy crisis.
It's the reason why major utilities in the U.S. are literally having to cancel the retirement of aging, dirty coal plants just to supply the gigawatts needed for the new AI data centers being built. The current trajectory is physically unsustainable.
But superconductors, they conduct electricity with absolutely zero resistance, right? No resistance means no heat.
Exactly. SnowCap claims their proprietary technology can offer a 1,000x efficiency gain over traditional CMOS chips.
1,000 times.
They envision taking the computing power of a modern data center, which currently requires a facility the size of a football field and its own dedicated power substation, and shrinking it down to the size of a standard shipping container.
That's insane.
But the real breakthrough highlighted in the intelligence isn't just the theoretical physics, it's the manufacturing viability. SnowCap recently successfully produced a 300-millimeter wafer using existing standard commercial fabrication facilities.
Wait, they can use the current factories?
Yes. They're proving they can move this technology out of the boutique billion-dollar university lab and integrate it into the existing mass production infrastructure.
Wait, if they have chips that run at zero resistance and can be built in existing fabs, why hasn't NVIDIA or someone just bought them out for $100 billion?
Because the engineering challenges of scaling superconductors are still immense, primarily involving the extreme cryogenic cooling still required for many superconductor materials to function.
Right, the cooling.
But if SnowCap or anyone else solves that scaling issue, it completely obsoletes the current incredibly energy-intensive data center model. It threatens massive incumbents like NVIDIA by fundamentally rewriting the physical rules of computation.
It's incredible to think about. But while the hardware engineers are desperately trying to fix the physical energy bottlenecks, the software itself is proving terrifyingly potent and simultaneously incredibly vulnerable to attack.
The software side is moving faster than we can secure it.
I want to bring up a specific quote from the raw social media sources in our stack. The CEO of Anthropic, one of the leading AI labs in the world, reportedly told a private group, 50% of all entry-level lawyers, consultants, and finance professionals will be completely wiped out within the next 1 to 5 years.
It's a stark, sobering warning about the sheer capability of these next-generation AI agents. We aren't just talking about chatbots anymore. We're talking about autonomous software capable of executing complex, multi-step cognitive labor.
But contrast that terrifying software capability with the gaping security vulnerabilities we're seeing deployed in the wild. The sources specifically detail an event known as the clawjacked exploit.
Yes. This was alarming. The data shows that 40,000 systems were compromised via an exploit in the OpenClaw AI agent framework.
40,000 systems.
And this wasn't just a glitch that crashed a program.
Yeah.
The exploit allowed for a silent, complete, full takeover of AI agents by malicious websites.
That's terrifying. Imagine the scenario. You have an autonomous AI agent authorized to access your bank accounts, read your confidential company emails, and interact with your proprietary codebase to do your job for you.
Your entire digital life.
And simply by that agent visiting a maliciously crafted website to scrape data, a bad actor can secretly hijack the agent's underlying logic and take control of all those permissions.
It's a house of cards. We're rapidly building these hyper-capable digital brains and giving them the keys to our financial and corporate lives. But the physical hardware they run on is bottlenecked by oil transit in the volatile Persian Gulf, and the software security architecture is riddled with invisible trapdoors.
It's an incredibly fragile foundation for what it's supposed to be the next major industrial revolution.
It really is.
And speaking of industrial revolutions and the reality of the everyday economy, we need to shift our focus from the tech giants and the geopolitical battlefields back to Main Street and the consumer.
Because it's hitting everyone now.
Because the macro pressures we are talking about, stubborn inflation, high interest rates, the looming threat of AI disruption, they're forcing massive, painful structural shifts in corporate America right now.
The most glaring warning sign in our sources regarding the broader systemic economy is what the intelligence memo calls the private credit canary.
Okay, the private credit canary. Let's dig into this.
To understand this, you need the context of the last decade. While traditional banks were heavily regulated after 2008, a massive $2 trillion shadow banking system of private credit exploded.
These are non-bank lenders.
Right. And one of their absolute favorite sectors to lend massive amounts of money to was software as a service, or SaaS companies.
Let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this. Why did private credit love SaaS so much?
Because the assumption was that SaaS revenues were practically guaranteed. A software company sells monthly subscriptions, they have high gross margins, incredibly predictable recurring cash flows, and high customer retention.
Like a gym membership you forget to cancel.
Exactly. Private credit funds looked at that predictability and felt comfortable lending them huge amounts of debt to fuel their growth.
But the intelligence says that foundational assumption is breaking apart.
Radically. We're seeing a vicious double whammy. First, you have the reality of higher interest rates exposing years of incredibly sloppy zero-interest rate underwriting. Companies that could service their debt at 2% are drowning at 8%.
The era of free money is over.
But more fundamentally, the AI revolution we just discussed is actively making legacy SaaS software models functionally obsolete overnight.
Why?
Why would a company pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for a massive, clunky, rigid SaaS platform when an internal AI agent can write a custom script to execute the exact same workflow for pennies on the dollar?
The recurring revenue that backed the debt is just vanishing.
Exactly. And the sources give us the hard data on the panic this is causing. Publicly traded private credit funds, which are known as business development companies or BDCs, are currently trading at a massive 82% discount to their net asset value.
82% discount.
To understand how catastrophic an 82% discount to NAV is, imagine a bank telling the public its portfolio of loans is worth $100, but the open stock market is looking at that portfolio and saying, no, we think those assets are only worth $18.
That's a massive lack of faith.
It implies the market believes the underlying loans to these tech companies are effectively toxic and unrecoverable.
And it's not just small players either. The sources note that huge institutional players like Blackstone's flagship private credit fund are facing serious redemption pressures from wealthy investors desperately trying to pull their money out before the music stops.
This raises a critical systemic question. Is this the first real structural stress test of the shadow banking system since the 2008 financial crisis?
It sounds like it could be.
These funds operate with an illiquidity premium. They lock up investor money for years. If these funds are suddenly forced to liquidate their assets into a falling, panicked market to meet redemptions, it could create a systemic, cascading feedback loop of defaults.
And the memo has a trade for this too, right?
The intelligence memo explicitly suggests an aggressive trade. Shorting Blackstone stock is a proxy way to bet on this impending illiquid crisis.
Fascinating. And it's not just the shadow banks feeling the brutal squeeze of this environment. It's Main Street corporate America. Look at Target.
Target is a classic example here.
The sources cover a fascinating moment where Target's CEO offered an incredibly blunt, almost painful public self-critique, openly admitting the company lost its way.
You don't hear CEOs say that very often.
No, you really don't. This was followed by the announcement of a massive $6 billion turnaround plan after enduring 13 consecutive quarters of weak or actively falling sales.
Target is a classic, tragic example of a massive corporation caught perfectly in the jaws of the macro squeeze. Think about Target's strategy in the 2010s. Cheat chic. They sold discretionary items, home decor, apparel, at a slight premium for a better shopping experience.
People love the Target run.
But that strategy is currently being crushed from both sides. On one side, you have Walmart absolutely destroying them on basic price. When cash-strapped consumers are dealing with cumulative inflation on groceries and rent, they abandon chic and go to Walmart for survival.
And on the other side,
Amazon is relentlessly beating them on convenience for those discretionary purchases. The intelligence memo identifies Target not as a hopeful turnaround success story, but as a dangerous value trap for investors.
the value trap.
Committing $6 billion to a turnaround means enduring painful, multi-year margin destruction with absolutely no guarantee that the consumer will ever return to their old habits.
We are seeing this tightening of the belt everywhere. The sources show Verizon is heavily scrutinizing a massive multi-year $1 billion NFL sponsorship deal.
Questioning the actual return on investment.
Exactly. And they just announced cutting 13,000 jobs due to fierce wireless competition. And then there's a fascinating strategic move from Starbucks.
Yes, the Starbucks migration.
So sources note they are opening a massive new supply chain office in Nashville, Tennessee, and actively offering relocation packages to their corporate employees currently based in Seattle.
That Starbucks move is what we call a leading indicator. It's a quiet, strategic corporate migration. They are systematically de-risking their operations.
Moving to friendlier territory.
They're transitioning from a high-cost, high-tax, high-regulation, union-friendly West Coast hub to a significantly lower-cost, business-friendly environment in the Sun Belt. As macro pressures mount and margins compress, corporate decentralization and migration away from legacy coastal cities is going to violently accelerate.
And on top of the brutal economic pressure, these companies are facing intense, renewed regulatory pressure.
The antitrust push.
We have a source detailing a major push by Senate Democrats proposing legislation to literally break up the big four meatpacking conglomerates. That's Tyson, JBS, Cargill, and National Beef.
To look at this objectively, removing the political rhetoric, the stated goal of the legislation is to lower consumer beef prices at the grocery store.
Which everyone wants.
The economic argument is that decades of consolidation have given these four companies, who currently control and process roughly 80% of the entire country's beef, far too much monopolistic pricing power.
80%? That's a huge concentration.
They dictate the low price they pay ranchers for cattle and dictate the high price they charge grocery stores for boxed beef, capturing a massive margin in the middle.
So what does the bill actually do?
The proposed bill would prevent them from processing multiple types of meat and forcefully compel them to spin off physical plants.
And the industry pushback.
The industry lobbying groups, of course, argue that this forced fragmentation will destroy the hard-won economies of scale in the supply chain and actually result in higher costs for the consumer.
But the intelligence memo finds an absolutely brilliant, hidden contrarian trade buried inside this messy political fight.
It really is a clever angle.
Think about it. If the government successfully breaks up the major meat packers, you massively fragment the industry. You suddenly have dozens of smaller, chaotic processors. And who benefits from a fragmented, less efficient meat processing industry?
It's a specific company called Darling Ingredients, ticker symbol DRR. They specialize in processing and rendering animal byproducts.
It's the classic selling pickaxes during a gold rush strategy.
Exactly. If the massive integrated giants are broken up, those giants can no longer efficiently handle their own byproduct rendering in-house. A slew of new, smaller, less integrated processors will suddenly enter the market, and they will be entirely dependent on third-party rendering services to handle their waste.
And Darling is the dominant player.
Darling Ingredients is the dominant player in that space. This regulation would hand Darling immense pricing power over a captive, fragmented customer base. It's a brilliant second-order way to trade antitrust regulation without betting on the actual meat packers.
He perfectly highlights how every single macro shift or regulatory hammer creates a hidden micro-opportunity if you know where to look.
You just have to follow the logic.
And the sources are full of these fascinating rapid-fire ripples across the economy. For instance, to combat the crippling housing crisis and lower construction costs, states like Colorado and Washington are currently easing century-old fire safety regulations to allow for single-stair mid-rise apartment buildings.
Which is a massive unlock for urban density. It suddenly makes thousands of small, previously unbuildable city lots highly profitable for real estate developers, potentially reshaping the architecture of American cities.
Exactly. We also see reports of landlords in London aggressively, preemptively evicting tenants before a sweeping new Renters' Rights Act goes into effect, a law which aims to completely ban no-fault evictions.
Unintended consequences of regulation.
Right, and in a glaring sign of how inflation is crushing discretionary consumer spending, Vail Resorts is severely discounting their previously premium Epic ski passes for Gen Z consumers, dropping the price down to $869, just in a desperate attempt to fight off sharply declining mountain visits.
The sheer volume and velocity of structural changes occurring in the global economy right now is breathtaking. We're witnessing simultaneous, profound resets in commercial real estate, retail strategy, shadow banking credit, and federal regulation.
It's dizzying. It really is. Which is why, to zoom out and look at the actual future being built amidst all this chaos and decay, we need to pivot to the most forward-looking and, frankly, optimistic part of our source stack.
Frontier science.
We're looking at frontier science and what the intelligence memo calls the synthesis engine. We have three major, dense biotech breakthroughs pulled directly from academic preprints.
And this is where true generational alpha is generated. It's not just about reading the individual scientific papers, it's about synthesizing them across disciplines.
Let's start with the first one.
Let's look at the first breakthrough. Researchers studying acute myeloid leukemia, or AML, which is a notoriously aggressive and deadly blood cancer, discovered that these specific cancer cells possess a unique survival mechanism known as metabolic plasticity.
Metabolic plasticity.
When oncologists try to kill the cancer by starving it of its primary nutrients using targeted therapies, the cancer adapts. It survives by relying on an alternative biological process called protein S acylation.
Okay, let's unpack that because biology can get dense quickly. S-acylation. What exactly is that happening at the cellular level?
In simple terms, S-acylation is a cellular modification process where fatty acids are physically attached to proteins to alter their function and location within the cell. The critical life-saving discovery here is that normal, healthy cells do not have the same deep dependency on S-acylation for basic survival.
Oh, wow. So it's an Achilles heel.
Exactly. So researchers found that by using a specific drug compound known as TOFA to chemically inhibit this S-acylation process, while simultaneously blocking the cancer's primary food source, they induce a state called synthetic lethality.
Synthetic lethality.
They essentially corner the cancer cell biologically, cut off its escape routes, and force it to die, exploiting a vulnerability that is entirely specific to the cancer without poisoning the healthy cells around it.
That is a massive paradigm shift for oncology.
Oh.
Okay, let's look at breakthrough number 2. This involves artificial intelligence, but not the kind that writes your emails or generates images.
Right, a completely different application.
Researchers deployed an unsupervised AI model, specifically a complex nonlinear convolutional autoencoder, to meticulously map rat brain tissue. They were specifically looking at the myeloarchitecture, which relates to the myelin sheaths that physically insulate and protect nerve fibers, much like rubber insulation on a copper wire.
The absolute key word in that entire description is unsupervised. Traditionally, if you want to train an AI to recognize disease in medical imagery, it requires supervised learning.
Humans holding its hand.
Exactly. A highly trained human pathologist has to sit at a screen for hundreds of hours, manually drawing circles on images, annotating this tissue is healthy, this tissue is damaged. This autoencoder did it entirely without human annotation. It learned the latent structure of the data on its own.
Right. The analogy I love for this is that it's like having a master detective who has never been to a crime scene in their life, and nobody has ever told them what a crime scene is supposed to look like.
That's a great analogy.
But you show them a million random photographs of living rooms, and because they understand the fundamental patterns of reality so deeply, they can instantly spot the one microscopic thing that is out of place. A speck of dust, a misaligned rug, completely objectively, without human bias.
And the study used this AI to detect the microscopic damage caused by traumatic brain injury with a level of precision that human eyes simply cannot match.
Unbelievable. And the third breakthrough in the stack is a crucial regulatory signal. The FDA granted priority review status for a new drug called brepocitinib.
Yes.
It's a highly targeted therapy for dermatomyositis, which is a severe, debilitating autoimmune disease that attacks the skin and muscles. The drug specifically targets the TYK2 and JAK1 inflammatory signaling pathways.
This is vital because it promises to replace broad, heavy-handed immunosuppressants like systemic steroids, which essentially carpet bomb the patient's entire immune system and cause horrific side effects.
So we have three distinct things on the board: a new understanding of cancer metabolism, an AI brain mapping detective, and a highly targeted new autoimmune therapy. The Intelliges memo takes these three disparate, dense papers and runs them through what it calls killer experiments.
Synthesizing them to find the hidden exponential value.
Let's examine the first synthesis.
The memo suggests taking that AI master detective, the unsupervised autoencoder, and combining it with a recently published massive multimodal atlas of the human adolescent brain.
Okay, stick with us here.
That atlas links the complex genetic networks of brain development to the statistical risk of developing severe psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder later in adult life.
Wait, let's make sure we truly understand the gravity of this. If you point that objective unsupervised AI at high-resolution images of adolescent brain tissue and sort that data by the known genetic risk for schizophrenia,
the AI could potentially find a fully automated physical imaging biomarker for microscopic myelination defects, defects that occur before the psychiatric disorder ever clinically manifests in the patient's behavior.
exactly. It completely rewires how we approach mental health. You aren't just diagnosing a disease earlier based on a psychological questionnaire.
You're literally seeing the physical, structural precursor to schizophrenia in the architecture of the brain before a single symptom appears.
That's incredible.
It creates an objective, preclinical diagnostic tool for neurodevelopmental disorders, allowing for interventions years before a psychotic break.
That is profound. But the second synthesis the memo proposes is arguably even more earth-shattering.
Yeah.
It connects that AML cancer vulnerability we discussed directly to the fundamental biology of human aging.
This is where it gets really wild.
There's a broader scientific study identifying ultra-conserved CPG sites in human DNA. These are specific areas of the genetic code that rarely mutate across generations and are deeply, inextricably linked to the epigenetic clock, the actual biological process of how our cells age over time.
And the memo proposes a brilliant logical experiment. What if you take those AML cancer cells, use the TOFA drug to inhibit their acetylation to stop their metabolic plasticity, and then, crucially, you measure the effect on their epigenetic clock?
If inhibiting the cancer's ultimate survival mechanism also halts, or even reverses, the aging process of the cell's DNA,
then you have just established a direct, mechanistic, causal link between cancer metabolism and the fundamental biology of aging.
you aren't just finding a clever new way to kill leukemia.
You are unlocking a completely new, targeted intervention for human longevity. You're locating the exact biological intersection where the pathways that allow cancer to survive cross the pathways that cause human cells to age and die.
That is a leap that could redefine modern medicine. It's absolutely incredible. And I want to quickly pause and contrast the incredible life-saving precision and promise of this medical AI with the absolute privacy nightmares we're simultaneously seeing in the consumer AI space.
The contrast is pretty stark.
One of the raw social media sources in our stack highlights a scandal involving Meta contractors located in Kenya. They are reportedly being asked to manually review intimate point-of-view video footage captured by users wearing Meta's Ray-Ban AI glasses.
It's so invasive.
We're talking about footage of people undressing, using the bathroom in their own homes, completely unaware that their glasses were still recording, and sending that intimate data back to the corporate mothership to train their AI models.
It's awful.
The dichotomy of artificial intelligence right now is staggering. It is simultaneously unlocking the deepest secrets of human longevity and creating a dystopian panopticon surveillance state that you willingly wear on your face.
It perfectly encapsulates the duality of the extreme technological acceleration we're living through. Unprecedented, world-altering promise, paired inextricably with immense systemic risk and ethical landmines.
And that brings us to the end of our massive stack of intelligence for today. We have covered an incredible amount of ground. From the physical choke point of the Strait of Hormuz effectively threatening global shipping and the Indian economy, to the sci-fi promise of superconductor data centers fitting inside shipping containers.
It's all linked.
From the multi-trillion-dollar private credit markets cracking under the weight of high interest rates and AI disruption to targeting the microscopic metabolic vulnerabilities of cancer cells to unlock human longevity.
We covered a lot today.
For you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway here is that in a world absolutely drowning in information overload, true value, true alpha, isn't found in just reading the daily news or scanning a headline.
Not at all.
It is found in synthesizing across disparate disciplines. It is deeply understanding how a single drone strike on an oil tanker in the Persian Gulf dictates the manufacturing of a microchip in Taiwan, which heavily influences the valuation of a venture capital fund in Silicon Valley, which funds the AI that might map the human brain.
And to leave you with one final provocative thought, let's draw one last chilling implication synthesized from everything in today's sources.
Okay, lay it on.
We've discussed AI agents autonomously writing code and taking over operating systems. We've discussed AI mapping the physical architecture of the brain with superhuman precision. And we've discussed in depth how massive capital is flowing to companies like Endural to heavily fund and integrate AI into the Pentagon's autonomous drone swarms.
Right. The integration of silicon and kinetic force.
This raises an incredibly important, terrifying question. What happens in the very near future when these hyper-intelligent, venture-funded autonomous systems are explicitly tasked with solving the exact macroeconomic and geopolitical bottlenecks we discussed today? What happens if an advanced AI system is deployed by a military or a corporation to secure the energy flow through the Strait of Hormuz, and its neural network operating purely on the logic of efficiency and probability decides that the most logical solution to stabilize global energy markets is an action that fundamentally misaligns with human diplomacy, ethics, or international law?
It doesn't care about politics.
We are rapidly handing the keys of the physical kinetic world over to logic engines that possess infinite processing power, but absolutely zero human empathy.
Wow. That is a heavy, vital thing to keep you up at night. What happens when the machine decides the best way to secure the oil is to eliminate the humans fighting over it?
Exactly.
That's a perfect place to wrap up this analysis. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Our goal is always to equip you with the full board. Keep questioning your underlying assumptions, keep reading between the lines of the mainstream narrative, and keep connecting these dots on your own. We will see you next time.